How is everyone doing today? Welcome back to another episode of The Banker Next Door. I am your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. Today, I'm going to be doing a book review for a book called The War on Cash. And this is going to be kind of the first in a little trilogy of books that I'm putting together. And I'll get into that in just a minute. But basically, what we're going to do here is that I am going to put up a little PowerPoint slide here. I'm going to kind of do an overview of the topics in the book. I'm going to read you guys a couple little excerpts out of the book and then just try to summarize what's the general message of the book here at the end of the day. So first things first, let's bring in the little PowerPoint slide here. So as you can see, this is the book, The War on Cash. The author here is David McRee. And the title, the synopsis below is how banks and a power-hungry government want to confiscate your cash, steal your liberty, and track every dollar you spend and how to fight back. So very interesting here. So like I said, the author is David McRee. This book was written in 2020, so about 4 years ago. The publisher is Humanix Publishing, LLC. It is approximately 146 pages, so a relatively short book, pretty quick read. And it asks the question, is the government waging a war on cash? I think a very timely and very interesting question. So just a couple of interesting stats here that it gets put out in the book that I just thought that people might find interesting. So, and again, I have to say these numbers are as of 2020. Obviously, they've changed a lot with the pandemic spending and stuff like that. But even so, it could give us a little bit of context as to kind of the currency floating around the world, as it were. So right now, as of 2020. You have $1.7 trillion in circulation. There's more than that today. Federal Reserve notes are $1.655 billion. For anybody who doesn't know, the cash in your hand is technically not cash. It's a Federal Reserve note. It says right there on the dollar bill if you look at it. So Federal Reserve notes, $1.655 billion. U.S. notes, $0.2 billion. Currency no longer issued. Also 0.2 billion. Coins outstanding, 47.2 billion. 2/3 of U.S. currency in circulation may be held outside of the U.S. The key word there being outside. The biggest export that the United States has is inflation. Yes, the inflation through our dollars, which are held outside of the United States. And once you understand that, you begin to understand why things like the BRICS countries, why BRICS exist, why these countries are eager to join BRICS, because we have outsourced our inflation. Inflation here has been bad, but inflation in other parts of the world that depend on the dollar as the world reserve currency, they're just getting crushed. I mean, they're seeing inflation that in some countries could be 4 or 5 times what the United States has. So if you just understand that simple concept, you'll understand a lot of kind of the geopolitics of what's going on in the world. And why many countries are eager to get away from the U.S. dollar. So the most popular denomination of the Federal Reserve notes is the $100 bill. It has been for a while. There are more $100 bills outside the U.S. than inside. It's very interesting. How much money in U.S. dollars exists in the world? Well, this author says it's basically tough to say, possibly around 10 trillion. But then he also goes on to note about 90% of which is electronic money that will never become cash. Again, another interesting stat there. And then he basically goes on to say, the world is racing to become a cashless society. Now, it's what I think is interesting to point out is that in 2020, you could probably make an argument that, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't think there's no doubt 4 years later that we are racing for a cashless society. I don't even think there's an argument in that anymore. You look at the BIZ, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bankers bank over in Switzerland. The BIZ is working on, central bank digital currency projects. They've been working on this around the clock. They've got basically every major bank, major central bank around the world. I think they've got something like 183 central banks working on, creating their own central bank digital currencies for their countries. There's just a huge push with this. I mean, you look at the, kind of the payment system that the FedNow payment system that was set up. Now, it gets a little gray there, and again, I digress here from the topic of the book here. But the FedNow system, very simply, it's built on a blockchain-esque system. So could it be converted to? Is it designed primarily for like a central bank digital currency? No, but could it easily be converted to such? Yes, I believe it. I believe it could. So just to kind of, like I said, sidebar there. Anyway, okay. Here's another very interesting thing here. So just a little monetary history here. So prior to 1946, the U.S. currency had bills of 1, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000. They basically stopped printing denominations above the $100 bill in 1946 and withdrew them from the circulation by 1969 due to a lack of use. The last 100, the last 500 and $1,000 bills were printed in 1945. Another sidebar. I had a customer once upon a time who actually collected money, and he actually had that 500,000, 5,000, 10,000. He actually had $100,000 bill that were real U.S. money that was used once upon a time. Now, what's interesting about that is that back then in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, what happened was the reason why the government printed those larger bills was for transferring money basically overseas. Like, it wasn't practical to, like if you had to ship $10 million to another country, and you had to send it in cash because there were no such thing as electronic payments or anything like that. So if you were sending the money overseas, it would be much easier to have a whole stack of, $100,000 bills or $10,000 bills instead of, trying to send $1 million in $100 bills or $20 bills. I mean, obviously, so that was a big reason for why they had those extra, those large currency bills. But they were a thing. They were very real, and the country did use it for a long time. President Nixon ordered large denominations removed from circulation in 1969 via an executive order. But what's interesting about this is this order cannot be located. But the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve issued a joint statement. I'm sorry, I lost our thing here. Issued a joint statement on the same date in question in 1969, announcing the removal of large bills from circulation. So just, minor technicality there, but I think just something interesting to point out. So, okay, now I want to just talk about what are the topics in this book. So we get into cashless economy. The author talks about academics advocating for eliminating cash, basically trying to make the argument of why it would be better to have a cashless society. He talks overall about kind of civil societies in general, war on cash. And he kind of gets into, the government, things that the government does, whatever. He talks about the use of cash and how, if you use considered large amounts of cash, I would say, amounts of cash over $10,000, like, basically there is a stigma there that, you use large amounts of cash. Well, hey, you must be a criminal if you're walking around using large wads of cash, right? And basically then he gets on to, if you give up cash, you're basically going to give up privacy and control, which is absolutely true. And then he talks about theft by inflation. I'm going to read you a little comment here on inflation in a minute, but this concept is critical. Like, you have to understand this concept of theft by inflation, because inflation is theft. It's theft by the government of your money. And there's no other way to look at it. It is what it is. Then he talks about by theft by confiscation. And then he gets into a very specific topic, which is civil asset forfeiture. And if you've paid any attention, if you just Google civil asset forfeiture and you start to look at some of the articles out there on this topic, you will see that the government over the last couple of decades has gotten extremely aggressive in civil asset forfeiture, basically just taking people's stuff. So it is a good thing that I think there needs to be a conversation held around that. Your bank is spying on you. And then he talks about structuring, which is CTR and SAR reports. That's like currency transaction, and SAR, which is suspicious activity reports. I could probably come back to that in a couple minutes here. Then he gets into kind of like the underground or the unbanked cash economy. And then he rounds out the book with basically talking about the IRS. He kind of gets into the global initiative, which I was just kind of talking about with like the biz, but he focuses a little bit more on like the World Bank, the IMF, the World Economic Forum. and their push for basically a cashless society, how they want to get away from that. And then he talks about, he kind of wraps it up with money and wealth. And I'm gonna get a slide here just a second on that. But he goes in here, questions to consider, and I thought that some of these were really good questions. So think about how you will avoid having your wealth confiscated by negative interest rates, inflation, and taxation. And I think that's a very powerful thing. And I think everyone should think about that. How are you going to avoid having your wealth confiscated by negative interest rates, inflation, and taxation? Now, negative interest rates is not an issue anymore, but it was an issue 4 years ago. But obviously, inflation and taxation remain paramount issues to this very moment. Consider turning your cash into hard assets that will maintain value, quality tools, household supplies, clothing items, etc. Many people stack silver, gold, firearms, and ammo. Those items will always have value, but will they always be legal to possess? That is a fantastic question. And I will tell people, if you don't know, in 1933 during the Great Depression, do you know what was outlawed? Gold. Gold was outlawed. You could not own gold, and it was not made legal to own gold personally until 1974. So you went basically almost 40 years without being able to legally own and possess gold and be able to just, sell it to other companies or, like a pawn shop or another individual or what have you. So, and then you look at firearms. There was a time for about 10 years where, like the AR-15s were banned. You couldn't own an AR-15 from like about 94 to I think about 2004. So I think that's a great question. Those items will always have value, but will they be legal to possess? What will a 1990s or early 2000s vehicle in good running condition be worth in another 10 years when every car that comes off an assembly line is chocked full of sensors, transmitters, and microphones that send gigabytes of private data about you to mega corporations and to a government that is increasingly hostile to anyone with a sense of independence and liberty? So that is a great question. And here's something I want people to think about. I think a lot of people think of electric cars in this fashion, but that's not true. Basically, they passed as part of I think it was part of the Infrastructure and Transportation Act. They basically passed a thing where every vehicle, I believe starting in 2026, every vehicle that comes off the line that is built by any car company is going to have basically like a black box. And you can kind of think of it like the black box on an airplane, like when an airplane would crash and they would look for the black box to basically say, okay, try to figure out like what happened or whatever. Well, every car is now going to have this black box, and it's going to be sought after by, like, if you get in a car accident, the insurance companies are probably going to say, hey, we want to see the black box. We want to get the data of how fast were you driving? How hard did you brake? Like, all this kind of technical data on the car. But it also, it goes, beyond, it gets into this whole notion of just tracking and monitoring basically everything that you do. And I think, and that's a big question. And then the author goes on to say, individual liberty is always constrained to those actions that do not reduce another person's liberty now or in the future. And that's a pretty profound statement. Let me say that again. Individual liberty is always constrained to those actions that do not reduce another person's liberty now or in the future. That's a very profound statement. It's very true. And then he goes on to say the elimination of or restriction of cash greatly reduces individual liberty. It is the face of evil. I don't disagree with that statement. I don't disagree with that statement. Basically, what the author is saying is, hold on to your cash. Hold on to your cash no matter what. So now he goes on to talk about kind of wealth and money. Wealth is not really wealth until you do something with it. True. Wealth exists without money. True. Money is not wealth. True. Money represents wealth that has been created but not yet consumed. The money itself is of no value without the goods and services it represents. Money is a fungible representation of wealth, created but not consumed. The existence of money does not devalue the barter trade experience. When someone takes your money without your permission by use of coercion or force, they are taking a part of your life that you can never get back. And why is that? Because you worked for that money. You worked for that money. You used your blood, sweat, and tears to make that money. And then no amount of money ever bought a second of time. Another very profound statement. That's kind of like nobody ever died wishing they'd spent more time at the office. So, no amount of money ever bought a second of time. So this book covers a lot of ground. It talks about cashless society, academics' views on cash, society's views on cash, the stigma of using cash, theft by inflation, civil asset forfeiture, search warrants, what banks do, shadow banking, IRS, and the Patriot Act. I thought it was a very good book. It was very interesting. It makes you consider different aspects of money and its use. And finally, the point is clear. Never, ever give up your cash. Never, ever give up your cash. And I think that, again, I think that's a great statement. So now let me read something here real quick. This is just from the preface at the beginning of the book. So the author says, what exactly do I mean by the war on cash? The war on cash is the effort by governments around the world to stop people from using cash to pay for things they buy. They do this by making the use of cash suspicious, by passing laws and regulations restricting the use of cash, and by requiring financial institutions to report certain types of cash transactions. The government cannot wage an effective war on cash by itself. It must recruit banks to be its eyes and ears and to put policies in place to make it hard or risky to do business in cash. The war on cash is not being driven solely by governments. The huge payment processing companies understand that getting a piece of every financial transaction in the world is worth trillions of dollars, and the early bird gets the worm. The data collection industry is also salivating over the profit potential of massive data collection, analysis, and sales. This book is not an argument against banks, financial institutions, or electronic payment systems in general. Not being able to keep your cash in a bank safe is just as bad as not being able to have cash. Without banks or some type, we would constantly be targets of robberies and would have to expend a great deal of time and money to defend our money against thieves. Poor countries today, like Haiti, or people unbanked in the United States, must expend time, energy, and money in an effort to safeguard their cash from thieves, loss, or destruction. Neither eliminating banks nor eliminating cash is the answer. And I think it's a great statement on behalf of the author right there. So, and then this is really good. And this is in the introduction. Governments hate cash. Let me qualify that statement. Governments hate cash when it's in your hands. Government officials love cash when it's in their hands. And so they are adding yet another war to their endless string of wars, a war on cash, your cash. Governments are in the counterfeiting business on a scale not ever dreamed of by the common criminal or by the mafia. But even that isn't enough. They want your cash, all of it, because it's hard to control and monitor money when it is in the form of cash in your pocket. They are busy passing laws to make it hard for you to have cash and to use cash. Making regular cash deposits can turn you into a criminal suspect and result in your bank account being confiscated by the government. Making regular cash withdrawals from your bank account can have the same result. Carrying large amounts of cash on your person can lead to your cash being seized without your even being charged with a crime. As you'll see shortly, even carrying as little as $2,400 in cash in your car while you're on vacation can result in seizure by law enforcement, and buying a car with cash of more than $10,000 from a car dealer will result in your identity being checked against a list of known terrorists, and the transactions will be reported to the government. The government does everything it can to track every dollar you earn and spend. It requires banks to report certain cash deposits and transactions. It requires certain businesses that pay you for services to report those payments to the IRS on Form 1099, formed snitching, if you will. If the government can eliminate cash from the system, it can control everything you do. Do you know what inflation is? Inflation is when those greedy capitalists keep raising prices so they can keep growing their overstuffed bank accounts, right? Wrong. If you already know what inflation is, you're among an elite few. Everyone needs to understand what inflation everyone needs to understand that inflation doesn't just happen, it is created by the government. So, yes, that is a very interesting thing there. Okay, I wonder, and I'm going to end here with this last thing. I just want to read this little tad bit on inflation. So, inflation is one of those things that the average person does not understand. Simply put, inflation means that dollars are worth less now than they were before. A dollar buys less today than it did yesterday. This means that prices increase to accommodate the lower worth of the dollar. When the government prints too much money, it increases the amount of dollars in the economy without increasing the amount of stuff people want to buy. This makes all the dollars worth less relative to the goods. This is inflation. And it robs you just as if someone put a gun to your head and made you hand over part of your checking account. It's a hidden tax. But the inflation tax is not progressive, meaning it does not hit the rich harder. Inflation is the cruelest tax because it takes desperately needed purchasing power away from the poor and from retirees who are living on savings and a fixed income. Just as when you add water to fresh orange juice, it dilutes the taste of the juice. When the government adds too many dollars to the economy, it dilutes the purchasing power of all the dollars. But what happens when there is a nationwide increase in dollars relative to the goods people want to buy? When the government creates lots of new dollars, it dilutes the purchasing power of all dollars. This means prices go up. Your money, including your cash, is worth less than before the new money was created. That's inflation. And I couldn't have said that better myself. I mean, I think that is a fantastic synopsis of kind of inflation and what is going on and how inflation is literally it's theft. It's theft of our money. It's the government overprinting and basically stealing our money from us. And that is a very difficult thing, I think, for a lot of people to grasp. You know, people just see kind of prices going up, and then certain politicians like to deflect by saying like, oh, well, there's shrinkflation and this is just greedy corporations out there doing whatever. No, it's the government. It's all the government. It's created by the government, and it's created through too much money printing by the government, and it's just that simple. So if you're mad about inflation, go talk to your politicians. Go talk to your politicians and basically say, why do I have this inflation, and why can't you guys stop printing money? Why can't you guys stop spending money? And why can you guys not stop exacerbating this problem? So anyway, well, that's my little rant on that. But like I was said, War on Cash. Very good book. I think it was very interesting to read. It was very eye-opening in certain regards. I think there's a lot of great information for people to consider. If you're looking for a book that perhaps has a different view on a lot of things, but particularly what banks do and how banks do it, I think this is a very interesting book to read. And I would just finish it off by saying, like I said, so I mentioned at the beginning that this is kind of a little bit of a trilogy that I'm doing. So I have two other books here that I'm going to review. So this is called Pirate Money and The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. Two very kind of interesting books. Is kind of along the same thing, but just a little bit different. A little bit different take on some things here, but I'm kind of doing these three books as kind of like a trilogy, because I think you'll see after the reviews how these things tie together in different aspects. Basically all at the end of the day, they're all kind of an assault on your money, if you will. But anyway, so that's what I got. I hope you enjoyed this book review. And if you like this video, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, as that always helps the channel. Please make sure to leave your comments down below. Please remember we are on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. Please make sure to check out the bankernextdoor.com. And then also, if you like the book review, I did a documentary review on a documentary called How to Rob a Bank, which is currently a Netflix documentary. If you'd like to check that out, I posted that last night. So go check out that video as well. And I will see everybody again soon. Thanks a lot.